Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Jeremy Leffler. I work in the Policy Office in the Division of Institution and Award Support at the National Science Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our final session of the Fall 2024 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. Before we get started, I do want to make a special announcement. Some of you may have heard through the grapevine, but I'm here to officially let you know that Jean Feldman, who is head of the policy office at NSF and who is also presenting this session, is retiring at the end of the year. Her staff that are here today and on screen, including Samantha, Beth, Suzanne, Davina, and I, would like to recognize Jean for leading the policy office for more than 3 decades. Jean has been a leader at NSF as we strive to ensure proposal and award policies and procedures are clear and understandable to the research community. Jean has also been a strong advocate for the research community, and this is evident in her passion for finding innovative ways to reduce administrative burden for researchers, for administrators, and for NSF staff. Jean has played a critical role in fostering collaboration across the federal research agency community and the research community writ large. So in closing, we just want to say it's been a pleasure working with her over these many years, and we wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors. So I'm now very pleased to turn this session over to our presenters who are going to cover proposal and award policy updates at NSF.
Well, welcome everyone to the NSF Proposal and Award Policy Update at the Fall NSF Virtual Grants Conference. This session will be a bit different from the other sessions that you may have attended in that in this session, we will be focusing on recent and proposed future changes to NSF proposal and award policies and procedures that will be of interest to attendees. Next slide, please. My name is Jean Feldman, and I am head of the Policy Office in the Division of Institution and Award Support. The Policy Office is responsible for the proposal and award policies for the assistance programs of NSF, meaning grants and cooperative agreements, including the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, which has been referred to many times throughout this hybrid conference. I will be joined by Dan Hofherr, Division Director and Assistant Chief Information Officer for Operations and CISO in our Office of the Chief Information Officer, Division of Security and Operations. Next slide, please. Well, what will we be covering as part of this session? We will cover NSF's implementation of the revised 2 CFR, which are regulations issued by the Office of Management and Budget and which serve as the backbone of the federal financial assistance process. Next, we will dive into the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide that, again, we've been referring to throughout this conference. We'll take a look at the PAP guide in both its current form as well as proposed changes that we plan to make. And then I will turn it over to Dan Hofherr to cover new multi-factor authentication requirements, which were recently implemented in Research.gov. We will end the session with resource information as well as an opportunity for Q&A. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about NSF's implementation of 2 CFR. The Office of Management and Budget posted revisions to 2 CFR in the Federal Register on April 22nd, 2024. OMB subsequently then issued implementation guidance to the federal agencies, which directed agencies to incorporate these revisions in terms and conditions of new awards by October 1st, 2024. I want to call your attention to the Council on Federal Financial Assistance, or COFA website, which has a large number of resource materials on 2 CFR that you may want to take an opportunity to peruse if you have not already done so. Next slide, please. As I just mentioned, OMB issued guidance in April 2024 to federal agencies regarding the implementation of the revised 2 CFR. This guidance specified that agencies must incorporate the revised 2 CFR in any new awards made on or after October 1st, 2024. Well, this mandate posed some interesting challenges for NSF as we implement 2 CFR in 2 different ways. One is through the PAP guide, and NSF is the only federal agency that implements 2 CFR via policy rather than a regulation, and through our award terms and conditions. Since we had already cleared and posted a new PAP guide for proposals submitted or due on or after May 20th, it was simply too late to incorporate the new 2 CFR into that version of the PAP guide. So how are we implementing 2 CFR? To meet the OMB mandate, NSF revised our Grant General Conditions, or GC1, to apply to all organization types. Previously, all institutions of higher education and research nonprofits used an interagency set of terms and conditions known as the Research Terms and Conditions, or RTCs. The revised GC1 was made available a month early to provide recipients with an opportunity to review these terms and conditions to assess any needed changes to policies, procedures, electronic systems, and training. The research terms and conditions are no longer being referenced in any NSF awards made on or after October 1st. The RTCs, however, do remain available on the NSF website since prior awards are still subject to the RTCs. But let me emphasize, since the RTCs are interagency terms and conditions, you may find that some agencies are continuing to refer in their new awards to the RTCs. That is not in NSF's control, and you need to follow the guidance specified by each of these other agencies. The reason that we implemented it this way was simply down to timing. With an April issuance by the Office of Management and Budget and a mandate to implement by October 1st, there simply was not enough time for an interagency revision of the terms and conditions to be done with all of the agencies. Next slide, please. Well, just so you're aware, NSF ensures that revisions are made for the entire suite of NSF terms and conditions. And this slide just depicts the large number of these. All of them have been updated to reflect the revised 2 CFR. I'm not going to read all of these titles to you, but this slide just demonstrates the magnitude of this implementation in terms of the revision of our existing requirements. Next slide, please. So unless otherwise specified, Grant General Conditions, or GC1, apply to all recipients of NSF grant awards per the list included on the slide because we no longer have the research terms and conditions. And in the event of any inconsistency that's in the PAP guide, because as I just mentioned, it has not been updated, and 2 CFR applies. Next slide, please. So how are we making it clear on the screen what applies to proposers and recipients? We want everyone to understand NSF's changes and our implementation. And we don't want anyone to miss this because this implementation is different from how NSF has normally implemented revised terms and conditions. So we've modified all of our program pages with the language under the first bullet, indicating that awards made on or after October 1st are subject to revised terms and conditions. We have also updated every PAP guide chapter, that's NSF 24-1, to include the language seen here. In the case of any inconsistency between the coverage contained in the NSF Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide and 2 CFR, including 2 CFR Part 200, the coverage specified in 2 CFR applies. This is how we will handle this in the interim prior to our being able to incorporate these changes into the PAP guide for fiscal year 2026, which I will cover momentarily. Next slide, please. So the policy office did hold a webinar which covered all of the changes that we've made in GC1. And since we have this virtual webinar series, these are available on demand and are available on the policy office outreach page. So I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that video so that you, if you want a greater idea of the specific types of changes that we made. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move on to the PAP guide. And the current version of the PAP guide, as I've mentioned, was effective for proposals submitted or due on or after May 2024. I want to emphasize here that in each PAP guide, we have a summary of the changes that is very, very instrumental in terms of your understanding what changes have been made in the way of changes to the document itself. Next slide, please. So we're going to change gears here and talk about the next version of the PAP guide, which was recently published in the Federal Register for public comment. So we give the public 60 days to provide comment to us on what proposed changes we plan to make. And this is at variance with some other federal agencies because we want you to have the opportunity to let us know where you believe that there is a lack of clarity, that there is undue administrative burden, etc. We then look at all that feedback and we post a final version of the PAP guide on the NSF website, and it will be in the spring and summer timeframe with an full implementation in October of 2025. Next slide, please. So I'm very pleased to present to you the proposed, and again, I must emphasize here, proposed changes to the PAP guide that were recently posted in the Federal Register for public comment. We anticipate that NSF 26-1 will be effective again in October 2025. And as part of this session, as I'm going through this, you may identify proposed changes where you believe that you or your organization may wish to provide feedback to NSF. And NSF will factor this feedback, the source of the change, whether it's statutory, regulatory, etc., as well as other factors to finalize the content of this next PAP guide. So let's dive in here to what some of these changes are. There were two changes that were made to the overall document that I'd like to make you aware of. The first I've really been talking about. We have now, in this version of the PAP guide, updated the PAP guide for consistency with the revised 2 CFR that was issued by the Office of Management and Budget April 2024. This will now, between our award conditions and the PAP guide, bring us into full compliance with 2 CFR. And while the entire 2 CFR Part 200 is incorporated by reference and cited throughout the PAP guide, there are several changes of importance that I've highlighted on this slide. Equipment-related thresholds. The thresholds were increased from $5,000 to $10,000 for equipment. De minimis indirect cost rate. Those are indirect cost rates for institutions that do not have federally negotiated indirect cost rates, and the de minimis indirect cost rate was raised from 10 to 15%. Modified total direct costs. The definitional threshold of each subaward is now up to $50,000. It was previously $25,000, regardless of the period of performance of the subaward under the award. Cybersecurity internal controls requirement was added, and cybersecurity internal control requirements were added, but the language does not mandate a specific framework. And in the guidance, OMB made it very clear that it will consider providing more specific guidance on this topic in the future. And finally, single audit. It increased from 750,000 to 1 million the expenditures of federal funds threshold at which a recipient is required to conduct a single audit or a program-specific audit. So the best advice that I can provide to you about these changes are that organizations should follow your rate agreement, unless otherwise modified by your cognizant agency for indirect costs. A second overall change that has been made to the document is that this version of the PAP guide implements the OSTP memorandum dated August 25th, 2022, entitled Ensuring Free, Immediate, and Equitable Access to Federally Funded Research. This is also referred to as the Nelson Memorandum, and this again is a requirement that applies to all federal research funding agencies. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to highlight several of the proposed changes to the PAP guide that may be of interest to conference participants. This is by no means all of the proposed changes, but the draft published on the NSF website highlights in yellow changes that have been made throughout the document with the notation in the margin of the source or rationale for the change as proposed. So the first I'd like to talk about is the About the National Science Foundation section. That has been revised to update our coverage relating to the support of human disease research. The intent of the revised language is to, 1, simplify and provide a whole agency position on medically motivated research. Number 2, to remove or greatly reduce confusion within the broader research community about what research is appropriate for consideration by NSF. And 3, to provide flexibility for some directorates to support research in some medical areas. The types of submissions section has been revised to incorporate a new proposal type. And this proposal type is appropriate for the small business innovation research or the small business technology transfer or SBIR, STTR project pitch, which is required for submission to these different types of programs. The Who May Submit Proposal section has been modified to implement Section 10339A of the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022. That section specifies that no NSF funds may be awarded to an institution of higher education that maintains a contract or an agreement between the institution and a Confucius Institute. A proposal certification also has been added to implement this requirement. For those of you that are not familiar with the term, Confucius Institutes are public educational and cultural promotion programs that are funded and arranged currently by the Chinese International Education Foundation, a government-organized, non-governmental organization under the Ministry of Education of the People's Republic of China. There is an exception procedure process that has been included in the PAP guide that you may want to peruse if that's appropriate for your institution. We have also modified the deadline date section to identify the medical leave of a senior or key person or an immediate family member, which we do not define, as an additional exception to our deadline date policy. This new language provides up to 5 business days beyond the stated deadline date, as is currently provided for natural or anthropogenic events. With both exception categories, no prior approval will be required from the Cognition Program Officer. You will continue to be required to check a box on the cover sheet if you are invoking either of these exceptions. And this is an area that we are particularly interested in receiving input from the research community and the associated impact that this may have on your organization. We've also added a new section in Chapter 1 to address recruitment of participants under NSF education and training opportunities and associated data collection, where we highlight the NSF education and training application, or ETAP. ETAP is currently available, and it's a customizable common application system where we connect individuals such as students and teachers with NSF-funded education and training opportunities. And ETAP is a great application. And again, it's currently available, and I would strongly recommend that you check it out. Next slide, please. The proposal font spacing and margin requirements section has been updated with new language that specifies that descriptive alternative text must be provided for all images, graphs, and charts, including sufficient color contrast for text and graphics, and must be submitted in a machine-readable, accessible electronic format that ensures legibility and readability for persons with visual impairments. We've also updated the allowable and unallowable cost section with new coverage on the American Drone Security Act of 2023. That act prohibits use of NSF funds on or after December 22nd, 2025 to 1, procure unmanned aircraft systems or drones that are manufactured or assembled by a covered foreign entity, or 2, in connection with the operation of such a drone or unmanned aircraft system. The coverage now also specifies the applicable sources of prohibited drones. Now, the applicability to you is greatly going to be determined by the kind of research that you do. For some directorates at NSF, this has limited or no impact, whereas others, such as our Geosciences Directorate, for example, where drones are a very big issue, and so you definitely want to take a look at this language if you anticipate use of drones, or if you're a research administrator and you have to implement this requirement for your organization. The mentoring plan section has been clarified to indicate that for each proposal that requests salary or stipend support for postdoctoral scholars or graduate students, the proposer must upload a mentoring plan in the supplementary documentation section of Research.gov, a description of the mentoring activities that will be provided to such individuals. Now, previously, we referred only to salary, and we needed to clarify in this version that this language also includes stipend support to ensure that we meet the statutory intent. Next slide, please. The Data Management and Sharing Plan section, or DMSP, has also been modified, and this is part of the Foundation's implementation of the public access requirements specified in the Nelson Memorandum issued by OSTP. Now, proposals will still be required to include a data management and sharing plan that describes how the proposal will conform to the NSF policy on the dissemination and sharing of research results. But the section now highlights the presumption that all publications and supporting data of these publications will be made publicly and freely available at the time of publication. Further, it provides through the granting of exceptions, but justifications must be provided if there are any access limitations for either the publications themselves or the supporting data. There will no longer be a page limitation for this section of the proposal. Rather, the data management and sharing plan will need to be prepared using a new tool that will be made available under the Data Management and Sharing Plan section of Research.gov. And this tool, which is a fillable web form with pull downs for common cases, is designed to ease PI burden and yield structured data regarding data and publication sharing and the requested exceptions and justifications. This is another proposed change where we are particularly interested in receiving public comment. The beginning investigator section, which prohibited research proposals submitted to our Biological Science Directorate from being duplicates of proposals to any other federal agency for simultaneous consideration, has been removed as a proposal limitation. What this means is that as a foundation-wide policy, there is now no prohibition against submitting a proposal to NSF and another funding agency or organization for simultaneous consideration. The potential life sciences dual use research of concern, we refer to it as DIRC, section has been updated, and it's been updated to implement the revised U.S. government policy for oversight of dual use research of concern and pathogens with enhanced pandemic potential, which were published in May of 2024. This government-wide policy calls out two types of research, Category 1 and Category 2. As part of this implementation, NSF will fund research which falls within the scope of Category 1 research, which is outlined in the policy. And Category 1 research includes research that was previously defined as DIRC, as well as research that involves 70 other agents and pathogens. NSF, however, will not fund research within the scope of Category 2 research, which is defined in the policy. Category 2 research involves research previously defined as pathogens with enhanced pandemic potential, or PEP, as well as any other research which involves other organisms with pandemic potential. Next slide, please. The rapid response research rapid proposal section was modified to state that requests may be up to $300,000, and that includes indirect costs, and up to 1 year in duration. The prior threshold that was implemented in January 5th, 2009 was $200,000 for up to 1 year. The early concept grants for exploratory research proposal section was also modified. It was modified to state that requests may be up to $400,000, including indirect costs, and up to 2 years in duration. The prior threshold implemented January 5th, 2009 was $300,000 for up to 2 years. These last two changes were made to recognize the rising costs of conducting research. We have added a new section, post-award changes that may impact tribal nation resources or interests, to address post-award changes that may necessitate an approval by the impacted tribal nation or nations. The individual development plans for postdoctoral scholars and graduate students has been updated, and it's been updated to incorporate a new definition of substantial support. NSF defines substantial support as funding received by an individual during the annual reporting period under the NSF award as either one person month or more of salary, or, and here's the change, at least one academic term, example, semester or quarter, of stipend support associated with an expected average time commitment of at least 10 hours per week. As with the mentoring plan, this change is needed to ensure conformance with the statutory requirement in the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022. The Foreign Financial Disclosure Report, CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, has been updated to address lessons learned from the initial reporting cycle that was mandated in NSF 24-1. And as a reminder, the Foreign Financial Disclosure Report is required by Section 10339B of the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022. And Section 10339B requires each recipient institution of higher education to annually report all current financial support, the value of which is $50,000 or more, and that's cumulative by source, and that includes gifts and contracts received directly or indirectly from a foreign source which is associated with the foreign country of concern. A foreign country of concern is used multiple times in the PAP guide, and so we have a full definition of it in the PAP guide introduction, section D. Well, what kind of changes did we make? We have worked extremely closely with the research community and research administration professional societies on our implementation of the Foreign Financial Disclosure Report. And we have learned a lot in this first year of reporting. So we have added new definitions to add improved clarity. The coverage on reporting of tuition has been revised, and we had revised it to address a number of questions that we received over the past year from the research community. The report due date is also being proposed to change, and it's changing from July 31st to September 30th. That will better align it with many institution of higher education's financial systems. And then finally, we've added new language to provide awareness that it's NSF's intention to make public the information provided or collected in the Foreign Financial Disclosure to the extent required or permitted under applicable federal law. Next slide, please. The next two changes will impact each organization that receives NSF funding and addresses mandated training requirements. Well, what's the first one of these? The first one of these is the responsible and ethical conduct of research has been amended in accordance with Section 10337 of the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 to require the mandatory training in the responsible and ethical conduct of research to include, in addition to mentor training and mentorship, which we implemented already, to include the following new categories of mandatory training. Training to raise awareness of potential research security threats, and foreign export control, disclosure, and reporting requirements. We've also greatly enhanced our research security section, and it's been supplemented with new coverage as follows. We include new coverage on research security assessment and required recipient documentation. What that does is highlight that NSF reserves the right to perform risk assessments of proposals and awards submitted to the foundation using analytical tools to assess non-disclosures of required information from senior key personnel and establish other policies and procedures for identifying, communicating, and addressing security risks that may threaten the integrity of foundation-supported research and development. We believe this transparency of what and how you use this, how we use this information is essential. We also revised this section to remind NSF proposers and recipients of the requirement to maintain supporting documentation. And that includes copies of contracts, grants, or any other agreements specific to foreign appointments, employment with a foreign institution, participation in a foreign talent recruitment program, and other information that is reported as part of current and pending other support for all senior key personnel. This information must be made available to NSF upon request, and proposers and recipients are expected to review the requested supporting documentation to ensure that it is in compliance with NSF award terms and conditions. We've also added new coverage regarding the research security training requirements that were specified in Section 10337 and 10634 of the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022. Each senior key person will be required, when this is implemented, to certify in Science CV that they have received the requisite training that addresses cybersecurity, international collaboration, foreign influence, and the rules for proper use of funds, disclosure, conflict of commitment, and conflict of interest within 1 year of proposal submission. That does not, and that language within 1 year of proposal submission is directly out of statute. It doesn't mean you have 1 year to get the training. It means you had to have already been trained within 1 year of having your name identified on that proposal. So that is a very important nuance. Authorized organizational representatives also will be required to certify that the senior key personnel have completed the training. And institutions of higher education may utilize the 4 training modules provided by NSF or use other training to help meet that requisite training requirement. We've also updated our property management standards section for consistency with the changes made to the vesting of title to equipment that are contained in 2 CFR 200. And the coverage on excess government personal property also has been substantially updated to address what our current requirements really are. Next slide, please. The research involving recombinant or synthetic nucleic acid molecule section has also been revised to divide the coverage into 2 sections. A, the use of recombinant or synthetic acid molecules, and B, the procurement of synthetic nucleic acids. Now, paragraph A is unchanged. Paragraph B is entirely new coverage that implements the recently issued U.S. government framework for nucleic acid synthesis screening that was issued by the National Security Council in 2024 to encourage providers of synthetic nucleic acids to implement comprehensive, scalable, and verifiable screening mechanisms. The National Institutes of Standard and Technology, or NIST, will further support implementation of this framework by engaging with industry to develop technical standards for screening as directed by the executive order. Our public access to copyrighted material and dissemination and sharing of research results sections also have been modified as part of the Foundation's implementation of the public access requirements specified in the Nelson Memorandum. Finally, our research misconduct section has been clarified to reiterate that research misconduct means falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism, and here is the parenthetical, whether committed by an individual directly or through the use of assistance of other persons, entities, or tools, including artificial intelligence or AI-based tools in proposing or performing research funded by NSF, reviewing research proposals submitted to NSF, or in reporting results funded by NSF. Again, I have highlighted some of the changes that would be of most interest to this audience. I would strongly encourage you to look at the PAP guide, where we have highlighted again in yellow all of the changes that have been made, as well as provide a note in the margins that gives either the source or a further explanation of all of the changes that have been made to the proposed 2026 PAP guide. Now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dan Hofherr, who's going to cover recent changes to NSF systems to incorporate multi-factor authentication. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jean. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Dan Hofherr. I am NSF's Chief Information Security Officer, and I'm here today to talk about multi-factor authentication for Research.gov sign-in. So we rolled this out back on October 27th. Very big and important release for us, where we implemented multi-factor authentication for Research.gov sign-in. MFA is a layered security measure that requires 2 or more authentication methods to verify a user's identity. It both protects you and NSF. Users with administrative or financial roles signing into Research.gov are using phishing-resistant MFA. That's a requirement. And all other users have to use MFA each time they sign into Research.gov. So everyone is using MFA now when they log into Research.gov. We've had a lot of users go through this process, over 70,000 to date right now. For many people, it's been easy, but we've had some people encounter problems, and we've been working through that. So the first step for you will be determining how you're going to sign in. Now, this only applies to folks who haven't signed in since October 27th. If you've logged in since October 27th, you've already gone through this. But if you haven't been in the system since October 27th, in the past, you've been logging in with your NSF ID and password, or your primary email address and password. If that's you, when you log in, you're going to have to enroll into MFA. And users, once again, who are administrative or financial users must use phishing-resistant MFA. Everyone else, you can use that phishing-resistant if you want, but you have to use MFA, and you can use standard MFA. So most users are in that category. We do have a large number of users, though, that are using organizational issued credentials. This is people that are in the In-Common Federation. For those, they're logging as they have, and they can use In-Common. We are only using institutions that have enforced MFA. for logging in. So, but that is most of the institutions. And then for login.gov, it's the same if you've been using the phishing-resistant MFA. Okay. The next step is to determine what type of MFA you have to use. So users with administrative or financial roles, they are going to be using phishing-resistant MFA. So your options are passkey, PIN, fingerprint, facial recognition, or security key. So these are our sponsored research office officials, financial administrators. Those are the main folks in that group. For standard MFA, that's your principal investigators, your graduate research fellowship folks there. And for standard MFA, they're going to use Google Authenticator or Okta Verify. So we have provided a lot of help documentation. Many people, this is second nature to, but for a lot of people, this is maybe the first time they've ever done this. So, one big tip is definitely to, if you have not done this before, read through the documentation. We have a great options overview guide. We've got a quick reference guide, frequently asked questions that we continue to update. The About Signing into Research.gov page has a lot of great resources for each MFA method, including a guide and a video tutorial. A lot of people are finding that to be very helpful. We've recently added a special guide for ad hoc reviewers. That's a group of users that I think is having the most difficulty, is our ad hoc reviewers. So we have a special document for them that describes the process from the very beginning. And then we, of course, have our generic meetings at NSF slide, which is really helpful for panelists. So this is how the screen, new Research.gov login screen looks like. So for people who've been logging in with their user NSF ID or primary email address, they go to NSF credentials and click on the button there. Organizational credentials, that's where our in-common folks are going. And then we have the login.gov credentials. For folks using their NSF credentials, there's a one-time MFA setup. You only have to do it one time, set that up. Each time then after that, you are using MFA, of course. So some tips. So, number one tip is try to set this up as far in advance as possible. So we've definitely had some stressed out principal investigators who didn't understand that this was a requirement or thought it was going to be easy for them, and they have a deadline coming. We've had panelists who are kind of in the same situation. So most people are able to do this, in 5 minutes, 10 minutes maybe, but there are a significant number of folks who've had some problems. And maybe the biggest problem people are having is they don't have a primary email address in the system that's valid. So an issue like that could take up to a business day to resolve. And that's because you need a primary email address in order to get your one-time passcode. So if you've been using the system a lot, you've got your valid email address already in the system. That's not going to be really a burden for you there. We've had a few people that have thought that there's a cost involved here. There's no cost. So it is possible if you attempt to enroll with a generic QR code, you might get diverted to a web page with a payment wall. That's not associated with us. So if you think you're having to pay money for this, you've gone down the wrong path, and you can call us up. If you're using Google Authenticator or Okta Verify, don't delete the app after you set up your MFA method. We've had some folks who not use Google Authenticator or Okta Verify. They download that, they go through the one-time setup, and then they think they don't need Google Authenticator or Okta Verify to log in. So you're going to need that app each time, so don't delete it. We have had some slowness at our service desk. So we've had some call wait times that are much longer than normal. That really starts to build once the West Coast comes online and starts their workday. So really, after 11, we're starting to see long wait times. Most of the questions we're getting could be solved by looking at the frequently asked questions, especially the video tutorials. So if folks find themselves on hold with the service desk, one option is to look at frequently asked questions or video tutorials, maybe even before you call. But we are working to streamline service desks, and we're starting to see better call wait times at the service desk. If you run into a problem, and there have been definitely cases of this where your folks haven't been able to crack the code on MFA, and we got a proposal deadline coming up, or reviewer activities, either ad hoc review or panel review, please contact your cognizant program officer or meeting point of contact as soon as possible. Screenshots are going to be very helpful. You'll see we have additional information to provide to the service desk. That's going to help us help you quicker. So you see that information, and we are definitely, because of the long wait times, we are prioritizing folks with upcoming meetings and deadlines so you can get through your work. And we really appreciate everyone's patience on this. As we go forward, we continue to want your feedback, so don't be shy. Submit your comments and suggestions for improvement to this website or to our feedback form, which you can get to from the orange feedback button. We really want your feedback, your ideas. We've already implemented some of the ideas that we've gotten, so we always are wanting to hear from you. So thank you once again for your support on this and for your patience as we work through this big change. Thanks.
So I'd like to ask my presenters colleagues who've been speaking over the last hour or so to come back on camera. I know we had a couple more resources we wanted to share with all of you before we get to the Q&A. So if we could pull that slide up, we do give you links both to the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide and the Policy Office website. On the Policy Office website is where you will find a link to the 4-comment version of the PAP Guide 26-1, which I also put a link to it in the chat for everyone. We include link information for all of the webinars and everything that the Policy Office has done and continues to do, as well as links to Research.gov and about signing into the Research.gov page. Next slide. And then finally, we have just our usual mantra of ask early, ask often, with links to how to find us at the National Science Foundation, both through a staff lookup and then also an organization list. I want to thank all of you for behind the scenes who've been answering a lot of questions in the Q&A, and we have just a little bit of time before we end for the day. But I do want to ask a few questions that we've had. A number of questions, Jean, starting with you on research security training that we saw come in. So I have a number of questions, and I'll start with, does research security training need to be completed before a proposal is submitted, or only if researchers receive NSF support?
Well, we received very specific language in the CHIPS and Science provision on this particular requirement. And the language clearly specifies within 1 year of proposal submission, meaning the intent is that an individual identified as a senior key person must have received the training to be identified on the NSF proposal. It has to be within 1 year of that. So those are two very, very important points. And then the institution with each proposal specifies that the individuals have, the senior key person identified, have received the requisite training.
And then as a follow-on to that, how often will researchers be required to take this training?
So what do we know? We know, number one, it applies to the research security training, senior key persons. So if you are with each proposal you submit, you are certifying that you have received the training within that year of submission of that proposal. So if you submit a lot of proposals over the years, you're going to probably have to do it on an annual basis to be able to make that certification. If, however, you don't have submit a lot of proposals, it may not impact you quite as often. But that was the intent for all senior key persons, and that they be trained when they're identified as a senior key person on an NSF proposal.
Okay, in keeping with research security training, could you provide a little bit more information on the content requirements for the training?
Yes,
and then, for example,
and thank you for asking about that, because now there are new sets of training requirements that were mandated by CHIPS and Science for the responsible and ethical conduct of research, and that applies to just about every undergrads, grads, postdocs, faculty, senior key persons, all of them. Then there is the research security, which I just noted. It applies to senior key persons. And so in the provision in CHIPS and Science for the research security training, it specified types of training that you must receive. And it identifies categories of information, cybersecurity, international collaboration, foreign interference, and rules for proper use of funds, disclosure, conflict of commitment, and conflict of interest. So you could either use NSF's training modules, you could use your own training modules. They just must cover the content requirements specified within CHIPS and Science. So all of those categories that I referred to.
Okay, and then the final question that I see on research security training was asking about whether training that is offered by a third party, by city, would be acceptable training for NSF.
As long as it meets the categories of information specified in CHIPS and Science, it is up to the individual institution to determine the mode of the training. And so if city meets those requirements, then it is an acceptable form of training. But you have to have all of the items specified in statute covered as part of whatever mode you do select.
Okay, moving over to Research.gov, we did see a lot of questions and suggestions. So thank you for that, and especially suggestions on the roles that are currently available in Research.gov for different actions within the systems. We've heard you and taking note of all of your suggestions. On the multi-factor authentication, Dan, we had a question from somebody saying that other federal agencies are starting to request social security numbers and driver's license pictures for their login requirements. Is this something that NSF plans on doing in the future?
No plans for that. That's actually never been raised at NSF. So we have lots of discussions on where we are and where we want to go, and that's never been raised as an option. So there's no plans for that, and no one's even mentioned that as a possibility.
Okay, well, I see we seem to have answered all of the questions that are coming in. Just wanted to be able to give perhaps the both of you an opportunity if there was anything else you wanted to mention before we sign off. Dan?
Well, I really hope I didn't mess up Gene's last grants conference. That would hopefully I did good enough. That was a lot of practice. So Jean's been amazing to work with, the IT shop at NSF. We've always relied on her and her team, and she's always come through for us. So thank you. Thank you, Jean. I just want to thank the community for bearing with us with this big change to multi-factor authentication. Thank you so much. There have been a good number of universities that have been targeted recently, and we've had great discussions with them. And you know who you are. And I really appreciate those universities and institutions working with us to keep them safe and to keep us safe. So thank you all so much.
And I would just like to close with, we have covered a whole lot of changes to the PAP guide for 2026. And literally, it just came out for public comment today, this morning. And we are sincere that we absolutely use the feedback you give us to help finalize the next iteration of the PAP guide. And so we greatly encourage you to look at the PAP guide and provide comments for your institution if you think there are things you'd like to highlight in the way of clarity, in the way of administrative burden. So we really do sincerely value the input that the research community provides. So thank you very much.
Okay, I want to thank all of you for joining us this week. And I'm going to share for a final time as a little reminder that the Spring 2025 NSF Grants Conference will take place May 21st to 23rd next year in New Orleans. There will be both an in-person and virtual option available for that conference, so mark your calendars for that. I want to thank you all for attending the sessions this week, and we look forward to seeing you at many of our future events.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.